given a lot of thought to the whole revenue issue, different sources of revenues or whatever. I focus on it more from a managing expenses point of view. And I think that on it, I also come from Massachusetts, and I came from Massachusetts for reasons related to taxes. I lived in London for a couple of years, and had I moved back to Massachusetts, I would have been taxed on everything that I made while I was in London. Massachusetts was one of 2 states in the country at the time, so my solution was very simple. I didn't move back to Massachusetts. I moved to Nashua, New Hampshire. But I think that the state has to, at the same time as you're looking at revenue alternatives, whatever, I think that they have to do a better job of managing expenses in a fair way. And for me, I don't understand the whole structure. I know town government very well in terms of the expense structure. I don't at a state level. I looked at the budget. I read the 20 or whatever page executive overview. I spent a little bit of time going through the 2,000 pages of the budget. But when you've got policy issues like the retirement system that the legislature, particularly the Senate, chooses not to address in a manner in which most citizens that don't benefit from it consider unfair, then I think it creates a credibility problem that's going to cause a problem with supporting anything. And I think, to mirror what Sue said, I think I'm not an expert in what happened in all the other states when they instituted income and sales taxes, and what happened with the property taxes short term, and what happened with the long term. I just know sound bites that I hear from people's comments. But I think that certainly before I would feel positive about it, I'd like to know that there's at least one success story out there where a sales and or an income tax was instituted and property taxes stayed down in the long run. Are there any?
We talked, I think, before you were here about the fact that, you want to say it again?
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say, I mean, you can look at a lot of different states and get a lot of different answers about how much do they spend and how do they raise the taxes. And I would suggest that you look at Delaware as a state that is a small northeastern state like us. They have an income tax but no sales tax. And the property tax on the average house in Delaware is about $500. So they found a way to keep their spending down and to raise the money in a fairer way. And I don't know, I think that their state spending, it's higher than New Hampshire's, but not a lot higher. I mean, overall state and local spending. And so, I mean, they've shown they can do it. Can we do it too? I like to think that we can do anything we set our minds to. When we know we got a problem, we should start working on a solution. And so far, with the pledge, basically we've said we're not going to talk about solutions, we're just going to wring our hands, and that's what we've done.
Right. But that's back to my point about the retirement plan, and I don't want to beat that one to death, but there are just some elements in that are just so obvious to most people in terms of what a special interest is able to accomplish at the on the backs of the average, the other 90% of the population. I think when there are major things like that, it's one of the big budget busters and whatever that are just not addressed because that's how somebody gets elected based on the support of that special interest. Then you have a credibility problem with the general public. If you're seen, we had the same situation in Hampton. I believe that as the Board of Selectmen as a town, we're seen as addressing some of the expense problems that have been in place for a number of years. I think that can generate credibility, which might cause people to approve things in other areas. And I think the state has to do that too.
So the crisis in government really is a crisis of our lack of confidence in our elected representatives. That if they were to implement a new tax, they would do so in a way that would not allow the property tax to keep climbing. And we worry about that, and we have this perhaps irrational fear or lack of confidence in them. But the worst case scenario is that we would end up like Massachusetts.
The other thing, just to respond to what you said, is I feel like the coalition is here to talk about the property tax. And when you talk about the retirement system, that's primarily a state budget issue, which doesn't have any property tax in it. You know, if we fix the retirement, I realize the retirement expense on the property tax too, but the big chunk that you're talking about, if we fix it or we don't fix it, has zero impact on the property tax because it's a state budget issue, which the property tax doesn't support.
To disagree with you on that point, the town of Hampton gets a bill from the state that we have to pay our share of that retirement fund every year. And this year they're going from what, 35 down to 30%?
It's going to go to 25.
Going to go down to 25. The state is dropping the bucket on the towns and that. So I mean, hate to get it wrong on that, but
No, but I guess my point is, if we fix the state budget, we can stop the downshifting to the property tax, but it doesn't actually lower, you know, it doesn't go right to the bottom line of the property tax. Some of it goes in a circuitous way.
Yeah.
But I mean, the real issue,
more or less.
I mean, the real issue at the local level is the cost of education. And unless we can get more money at the state to fund education, that, you know, we're not gonna affect the property.
I'd like to point out that the retirement plan in this year's budget was approximately 1.6 million out of a $25 million budget, and that it was the fastest increasing element, or major element of our budget, and that the main capability to impact that somehow is at a legislative level as opposed to at a town level. And again, the reason I'm focusing on that, that's not going to fix that. It's not going to solve all the world's problems because it has had such impact on the town. It's the area where I really made an effort and understood it. If I started talking about health and human services or something like that, I get about 5 words out of my mouth before you realize I had no idea what I was talking about. So.
It seems to me that you have to see the connection between the state and the locality. And imagine that you were going to propose a state income tax or a state sales tax. A lot of voters could say, what are the revenues going to be used for? For staffing all kinds of office towers in Concord? Are you going to have a massive expansion in state agencies? Now, personally, I would argue that the state agencies are understaffed. They're on a shoestring, and they don't have enough staff and budget to do their job at the state level. But still, a lot of voters would say, I don't want Concord to end up like Albany or Boston. You know, all New York State, boy, you've got an income tax and you've got a revenue stream that creates an empire in Albany. We don't want that in New Hampshire. So it seems to me that what you have to promise to the voters is if we did pass a sales tax or an income tax or raise the rate on the DBT, I wouldn't rule that out. The money is going to be largely or totally dedicated to school aid. So that you can reduce the school tax rate in the towns and cities and still have adequate public education, so that, you know, maybe we have some chance of educating young people who get a good education and can afford to remain in New Hampshire when they become adults. So to me, the key issue would be to link the tax reform at the state level to aid, because the towns and cities are on their own in this state. You know, Concord essentially provides almost no aid. Other states provide much more generous state aid, and that holds down the property tax rate. I suspect that's why in Delaware, I would mention that the reason the property tax is $500 on the house is because, what's the state capital, Dover? That Dover is providing generous state aid from that income tax. That's the key connection.
Just out of curiosity, how does Delaware compare? I believe the per capita total tax in New Hampshire is something like $600 or $700. Is that correct? In other words, combining all of it.
That's got to be a lot more than that.
Yeah.
At least with the property tax in there. If you're just talking about state taxes, I don't know. I've never seen it
I'm
on a per
just curious
capita
how
basis.
Delaware compares.